Welcome to tonight's special program, Antisemitism at the University of Toronto. My name is Rabbi Jared Grover, and I'm the Senior Rabbi of Beth Tikvah Synagogue. It's my privilege to be moderating this Zoom session tonight. I want to begin by thanking Howard Price and our Israel Affairs Committee for putting the program together, Gail Kurtzman, our Director of Programming, for doing much of the groundwork, and Daniel Nurgitz, who is our tech leader, for his support. Thank you as well to our community partners, UJA Federation, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, B'nai B'rith, Doctors Against Racism and Antisemitism, the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, and many synagogues around Toronto, including Shari Shemayim, Beth Shalom, and Beth Emeth, for sharing information about tonight's program with their communities. The background of this forum really goes back to a January speech given at the Faculty of Medicine by Irwin Cotler, Canada's Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Antisemitism, and former Minister of Justice. The speech was meant to be a reflection organized by the Faculty of Medicine, the Temerty Faculty of Medicine, a reflection on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That speech prompted complaints from University of Toronto faculty members who claimed that Cotler reinforced anti-Palestinian racism in a way that is consistent with a broader pattern of silencing and erasure of Palestinian voices. The faculty also accused Cotler of suggesting that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. While that specific incident initiated the idea for this forum, it is sadly only one part of a strong list that I could give you of anti-Jewish incidents that have occurred recently of U of T. Challenges that occur also on many other university campuses across North America. The hate manifests particularly with the 3 Ds of anti-Semitism formulated by Natan Sharansky in order to distinguish legitimate criticism of Israel from anti-Semitism. Sharansky defined anti-Semitism as the delegitimization of Israel, the demonization of Israel, and subjecting Israel to double standards. That kind of anti-Semitism is propagated by many students, but increasingly by members of the faculty and administration as well, a very worrying trend for those of us who are concerned with intimidation and discrimination against students on campus. Online to discuss these issues, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. Please forgive the abbreviated biographies that I'm going to give them, as we want to maximize time tonight for our conversation. Dr. Frank Summers is a member of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto and a co-founder of Doctors Against Racism and Antisemitism. Chaim Katz is a PhD student at U of T who has been a vocal student advocate on this issue. Yardena Rosenblum is another vocal advocate. She is president of Jewish Student Life and a Hillel student leader. Stephen Farber is here representing UJA. He is senior vice president for countering anti-Semitism and hate. Michael Mostyn, chief executive officer of B'nai B'rith Canada, and Jamie Kersner-Roberts, director of policy for the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. She's substituting for Michael Levitt, who was not able to join us tonight. The audience should know that in addition to these distinguished panelists, we did extend an invitation to President Gertler and other members of the University of Toronto administration. We wanted them to participate in this forum, but they unfortunately declined. The plan for this conversation is as follows. We're going to begin with Chaim and Yardena, who will each have 5 minutes to present their involvement and contributions and provide a perspective of what it's like on the ground now for U of T students. Next, Dr. Summers will have 5 minutes to present Dara's recent interactions with the Department of Medicine, including the letters signed by over 300 Jewish faculty members to protest the accusations against Erwin Kotler. Frank will also tell us what it's like on the ground as a Jewish member of the faculty. Then each representative from the 3 major Jewish organizations will have 5 minutes to present their assessment of anti-Semitism on campus and all of the repercussions both on campus and for the general Jewish community, what they think is the right response and how they are responding. During the time we have left, I'll ask 1 or 2 focused questions from our panelists based on the substance of the discussion and their presentations. And if you want to give me some ideas, members of the audience, if you want to give me some ideas on what to ask, feel free to write me using the chat box function at the bottom of your Zoom window. I do want to be clear before we begin that this event is not meant to be an attack against the university. The people on this call and the organizers of this event come from a place of loyalty and appreciation for the university. We also recognize the efforts made to combat anti-Semitism on campus, and actually also some tremendous partnerships that various departments have established with Israeli academic institutions. We are not here to demonize U of T. This forum is about making sure that the university adheres as best as it can to the principles of academic freedom and the respectful exchange of ideas, which made it the outstanding school that it is. We want to keep it that way, and we believe that in order to do so, much more work is required to combat anti-Semitism on campus. So let's begin with Chaim and Yardena. Give us an update from a student's perspective.
Thank you, Rabbi Grover, to Dr. Price and Beth Tikvah for inviting me to sit on this panel, and my very esteemed co-panelists for being here to speak about this important topic. I am honored to tell you my story, but I always begin by saying it's just my story, and I am just one student. I grew up in the Calgary Jewish community, a place that requires collaboration across affiliations. I went to Jewish summer camp at Chabad and BB. I attended both Jewish day schools. I worked at one synagogue, and I attended another while doing all 3 different Jewish youth groups. I've also been connected with Jews who were unaffiliated with the community. I have been fortunate to see what is possible when we work together. In contrast, I also know what happens when anti-Semitism is left to its own devices. My Zeta is a Holocaust survivor, and going on the March of the Living, I have personally seen the scratches on the walls, the graves, and the tears in my Zeta's eyes as he told me his story, and he told me to never hate, forgive, but never forget. Anti-Semitism exists in our world. This is a fact. It has always been around me. What I did not expect was the apathy about the plight of Jewish students on university campuses. You may have seen the stories in the news upon our return to school in September. Students returned to campus along with anti-Semitism, not just neo-Nazis with tiki torches. Why Jewish students say they also fear cloaked anti-Semitism. Jews are under siege on campuses and in college towns. Where is the outrage? Where are the intellectuals? Recently, you may have seen undergraduate votes, which my colleague Yardena will speak about, or the McGill student vote to boycott all corporations, institutions complicit in the act of occupying Palestinian territory. These broad votes leave Jews isolated, wonder whether or not there will be access to kosher food, as was considered a potential conflict by my graduate union in the Scarborough campuses. How do Jewish campus organizations exist if they celebrate anything to do with Israel in that case? Since the overwhelming supporters of these broad motions believe Israel's mere existence is complicit in an occupation. These may seem like problems on the ground of faraway academic campuses, but today's students are tomorrow's leaders. This is evident by the response to the Honorable Erwin Kotler's speech, which we gather here for today to respond to. I am telling you, I am terrified. The university took almost 6 years since my first contact with them to provide any resolution on my concerns with the BDS committee funded by my union. That is either 2 degrees or 1 long PhD. Even then, after a group of student panelists opined that the BDS committee violated the anti-discriminatory policy, even after my union hired lawyers to fight this recommendation, and I, with the support of B'nai B'rith Canada and David Alamale, my lawyer, was able to actually defend myself, even then, the university solution was just to cut $10,000 in fees from a multi-million-dollar organization. And my understanding currently is that a student having similar concerns will have to start the process all over again. Maybe it will only take 4 years this time. During my time on campus, I have heard many stories of overt anti-Semitism, with things being thrown at Jews or just indirect anti-Semitism. During the pandemic, our Jewish students were isolated, being attacked on social media. With the conflict in Israel, it puts fuel on already burning fire of anti-Semitism. It's become socially acceptable to hate Jews, almost socially encouraged. I will leave you with one story and my 3 key takeaway points of what we need on campus. I constantly hear that Jews should just return home. What home? Jews have had to make homes all over the world because we have been kicked out of every place we have ever lived, including our original homeland. Should I go back to Europe where my grandfather was almost killed? Should I stay in Canada where anti-Semitism seems so rife that there are legitimate conversations with people my age about when we might have to leave or be forcibly kicked out? With the holiday of Passover coming up, I will be reading the Haggadah from my grandparents, which tells the story of freeing of the Jews from the land of Egypt and eventual return to Israel. Interestingly enough, the English translation from this early 20th century Haggadah says return to Palestine, as it was called at that time by the British for the Jews. However, no matter what it has been called, we have had the urge to return there. At the end of the Seder, we will sing L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. If you believe Wikipedia, that tradition was first documented in the 15th century. My 3 main points are the following. Jewish students go to university to learn, not to justify our existence. But this is what we are forced to do right now, unless we ignore this problem. This is a dangerous time for Jews on campus. Many people have privately thanked me for my advocacy, but they themselves are too scared to speak out. This is understandable. It is toxic on campus and in these spaces where our representatives do not care about our fears or concerns. However, what might be more dangerous is that 3 students who have been working constantly on this for the last 4 years, going to the graduate union meetings, meeting with Hillel, are all graduating or are graduated. And as of now, there is no succession plan. We have not been able to find a Jewish graduate student to take over this effort, which means we do not have voices in those meetings. Finally, we need community support. Events like these provide hope that organizations can come together on critical initiatives. My community, my friends, my family. This is a critical time. I have been fortunate to work with incredible Jewish and non-Jewish leaders, have had the support of various organizations in this community over the years, but this needs to be continued and amplified. Our students need to feel safe. Our students need to be encouraged to learn and be educated on the ongoing situation, even if that is not what they went to university to do. Because as Hillel says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Thank you for your time this evening, and I look forward to answering the Q&A.
Thank you. I'm echoing Chaim's sentiments. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. These sorts of events help amplify students' voices. Bit of background, I am an undergraduate student at Scarborough campus, and I am the current president of Jewish Student Life. I am also a Hillel student leader. So in regards to general, like downtown campus, there have been quite a few incidents of anti-Semitism. Most recently, the student union downtown voted to refrain from engaging in activities or any sort of dialogue with organizations or clubs that associate with Israel. And similarly, on my campus a year ago, the student union for Scarborough campus decided to refrain from engaging with any companies or organizations that normalize Israeli apartheid, which very broad claim there, but we have tried to approach the student union we tried many different methods, many different times. And before this got passed, however, it was passed, and including in that, kosher food suppliers were brought up. So we didn't have an exemption for kosher food suppliers, and our student union has not adapted or changed their original motion to include kosher food suppliers. At events, we've been left out of multicultural events and not had kosher food provided at general meetings from our student union. And downtown, I'm sure they will face similar issues as we have at Scarborough. In regards to kind of the backlash of what happened in December, the university did take steps to try and amplify our voices. They met with us. I met with Principal Teddy and several other staff members of the university, and we had some good dialogue. It was a good start, but overall, we've seen performative action from the university, from the student union, in order to address our concerns. We are being left out of the backdoor conversations where they get to decide if we have food to eat, if certain people are able to proudly wave their flag at events or set up a booth for their cultural heritage. And the university and student union, more so the university, at least reply, but they haven't made any changes. And this is something I've seen over my years, and I'm sure many other students have seen this for years and years and years. And over the recent years, we've seen some changes. I've met with the Minister of Education and the Minister of Colleges and Universities for the Ontario government, and both of them receptive to implementing education about the Holocaust, education about modern anti-Semitism in high schools and elementary schools. However, we don't see this happening. And that is what leads to the isolation and scary situations that many students face in college and university. And U of T is a world-renowned school. We get people from all over coming to this school, to my campus, to downtown, and they are being faced with classic anti-Semitic tropes, classic discrimination that you do not expect to be present in 2022, yet it is. And what we see with the staff members is that this isn't just a student problem. These are educated staff members, educated people, academics, that are propagating the exact same tropes that we have seen for centuries. And I think that conversations like this that allow for these experiences to be shared will allow for broader education and will allow for the students like me who want support and who need that support to be felt will be able to get it. And so I hope that any students listening or anybody on this call that has any university age students will be able to share that about our school, because the University of Toronto is a great institution, and the anti-Semitism that we have seen for years is changeable. We need to make those changes. We need to have our voices heard. We need to be in those rooms for those discussions. Thank you.
Dr. Summers.
Thank you, Rabbi Grover, and hello, everybody. This is a tough subject, and it's extremely and especially painful for me as a child survivor of the Holocaust. And then as a refugee from the harshest days of Stalinist communist oppression. So sometimes when we are labeled white supremacist, I chuckle to myself. Some white supremacists, I and my family and many others who escaped the horrors and the gas chambers, I do have an interest in history, which I'd like to share with you, related to Toronto and the University of Toronto. And I'll start with a quote from one of the staff doctors at the Toronto General Hospital, who was addressing the third Jewish U of T medical school graduate, Abe Wilinski, who graduated in 1908. And I quote, "To be honest with you, they say you would be a good man for staff here." Then he continued, "You may as well know that I'd hate to see any Jew get on in this hospital. Once you open the door, they'd be running the place in no time." Dr. Wilinski goes on in his book, A Doctor's Memoir, to write, he, Dr. Robertson, was by no means the only man with this attitude. It was common enough then, although usually not so outspoken. It was not until 1929 when the Toronto General Hospital began to accept one Jewish intern annually. And 2 more decades passed before a Jewish doctor was given a clinical appointment on the indoor staff of a hospital affiliated with the University of Toronto. That wasn't that long ago. Our organization, Doctors Against Racism and Antisemitism, has been active over 12 years now in the realm of healthcare services. Recent past actions have included the webinar, Medicine and the Holocaust, It's Time to Teach, with editor-in-chief of The Lancet as a speaker. And then we advocated its implementation in all the 17 Canadian medical schools, and we received positive responses. All these activities, by the way, can be accessed at the DARA website, daradocs.org. More recently, DARA organized the open letter to the leadership of the Temerity Faculty of Medicine, signed by 350 Jewish medical faculty members. And this was in response to the calumny submitted to the same leadership by 45 U of T faculty members, specifically attacking Dr. Cutler's webinar presentation on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was distorted and misleading, and the word calumny applies. Now, our faculty leadership, in my experience, is supportive of the issues we're facing. And the response from the provost is encouraging that we have received. But as we know, actions speak louder than words. And we're waiting for actions. Now, in DARA, we affirm the following. We affirm the need to counter the well-organized and financed disinformation campaign of BDS and Israel Apartheid Week. There is a need for increased actual and moral solidarity among ourselves and non-Jewish organizations. There's a need to monitor and ensure that U of T is transparently accountable in promoting anti-Semitism education and enforcement by well-trained EDI personnel. This is especially important in light of the signal failure of the so-called Antisemitism Working Group anemic report, which not only rejected an important opportunity to educate by adopting the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, unlike, for example, the universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and Stanford, but also now provides the rationale of academic freedom for the practitioners of anti-Semitism. And this has already happened. An example is a junior medical school faculty lead has posted, quote, "If you're not for Palestine, don't count yourself a human being," unquote. Would Jewish medical learners feel comfortable reaching out for her counsel? Would you? Another example is related by one of our resident physicians who was reporting in a dialogue webinar we organized last August. You can all look this up on our website, where she relates how she was taking the history of a Jewish patient and, as she was supposed to, relate the history to her supervisor, a staff member of the faculty. When she mentioned that the patient was Jewish, the staff person rolled their eyes. Is this an appropriate atmosphere in which we should be teaching our medical students and learners? What would happen if we were to post something like, "If you're not for Israel, don't count yourself a human being"? Or if we rolled our eyes when a medical learner relates a history and mentions that this person is from Palestine? Totally unacceptable.
Dr. Summers,
Finally,
can I ask you to summarize your remarks? I just want to leave enough time
finally,
for conversation.
just to conclude here, we need, Dara believes that we need to educate all our university community that calling for the destruction or elimination of Israel, the ancient homeland of the indigenous Jewish people, is fundamentally anti-Semitic. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's start now with our responses from the representatives of the Jewish organizations. Start with you, Jamie. So the wider question is, how does the Jewish community respond? We already have some questions that have been forwarded to me from participants saying it's enough talk. What are the specific demands? What should we be communicating, and what should our expectations be from the university?
Okay, well, thank you, Rabbi Grover, and to all the organizers for inviting me tonight. I am replacing Michael Levitt, the president and CEO of Simon Wiesenthal, and my boss, and he gives his regrets, and unfortunately, he just came down with COVID, so this is why he was not able to join us. So just wanted to pass that along. Actually, Rabbi, what I would like to share is three things that I have learned from what I've seen unfold so far at U of T. I mean, I just want to walk us back to almost 1 year ago, till May of last year, when Israel was under rocket fire attack. And, I'll tell you that it's a big part of my job that I take calls from people who have been a victim of a hate crime or a victim, of an anti-Semitic incident. I normally handle these kinds of cases with positivity, focusing on what I can do to help, what I can do to address the problem. And I will tell you that last May was something I think I don't know if any of us in the Jewish organizations have ever experienced before. All day long, my phone ringing off the hook with person after person after person telling me horrific stories of abuse that they had been subjected to. And none of the stories were more horrific than the stories of our students. And within our students, I can say that none were more horrific than those of the medical students. I mean, this was a period of time where I lay in bed for hours, not unable to sleep, just the sheer demoralization of what our students were up against. And that point of view has changed dramatically from last May until now, because now I've started to see some lessons. So, you know, at that moment, we reached out to the medical school at U of T to address some of the problems. Our first demand was that they put in place some kind of legitimate process for Jewish students to bring forward complaints of anti-Semitism, and they did do that. And our second demand was to bring anti-Semitism education to the school, and we were actually the co-sponsor of the Kotler talk. We were the co-sponsor of the Kotler talk that led to the Michigas that Dr. Summers was talking about. So what has left me with much more optimism about our ability to fight back on campus is three lessons that I have seen, that I have learned from this experience. One lesson is, we as a community, I mean our whole community, but also I mean our organizations, we really need to commit to investing and supporting our grassroots leaders. And what I'm talking about specifically, I'm talking about people like Yardena, I'm talking about people like Chaim, I'm talking about the students that are feeling so frightened by the toxicity of the environment, so overwhelmed. And we really need to see this as our community's number one priority in growing the number of students that have the courage and the resources to do as Chaim and Yardena have done. So I think this is one lesson that I take. A second lesson that I take is that we need allies. I think one of the scariest aspects of what happened last May was that Jewish students were so alone, that no other students were stepping up for us. And I think we need to learn something from organizations, for example, like Black Lives Matter, that has done an incredible job of building allyship outside of the Black community, and we need to start getting better at building allyship. So I'm pleased to say that we at Wiesenthal are launching a new program on campus advocacy against anti-Semitism that will be directed at non-Jewish students. And this is our hope, that we can build allyship on campus this way, and we remain open to other ideas from the community about other ways we can do that. And the third lesson that I wanted to share is that, you know, the number one thing I think our community has going for us in the face of anti-Semitism is our unity. You know, except for a very fringe minority of extremists in our community, we are, for the most part, extremely unified. And we need to leverage that asset by working together, and by collaborating, and by using each of our unique abilities. And for the first time, I'm seeing this actually happening. I'm, you know, just so delighted by the fact that, you know, we set up this event, and when this event ended up becoming, you know, there was this balagan afterwards with this petition, Dara stepped in and mobilized their professors on the ground. You know, we have seen the students step up in their moments. We have seen UJA step up. B'nai B'rith has been fantastic on analyzing and dissecting the report and organizing the professors. So we are seeing a coordination and collaboration that I don't remember seeing before. And I think this sets a great precedent for our ability to continue to fight back at U of T, and to spread the fight to our other campuses as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Stephen.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Farber from UJA, in a role that was created in the wake of May, which I can touch on in my brief remarks. But first, let me thank, as my predecessors on the panel have done, to thank Beth Tikvah, the entire staff, who put this great event together. I'd also like to thank my fellow co-panelists. Some are friends already, and some are going to be new friends after this evening. But I'd also like to publicly mention the terrific work that they're doing, from Dara to Friends of Simon Wiesenthal to B'nai B'rith. It's really been terrific work. And for those that are listening, you should know that there's been a greater emphasis on some of the areas that we can cooperate. And so I think the people on this panel, if I may be so bold as to speak, at least in one generality, have heard that they wish the various organizations to be able to work more closely together. And I think that's happening. Now, everybody has different skill sets and different expertise and different relationships. But that's been, that's been very nice. I'd also like to specifically call out Chaim and Yardena for those that are concerned about what's going on campus. I hope you take some solace, as I have, over the past 20 minutes, in listening to the way they handle and express themselves as they have throughout their academic careers. I'd also like, because it's towards the end of this week, if we don't get time during the Q&A, to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, a Chag Pesach Sameach. Let me just say that Jamie spoke a little bit about the lessons of May, of which UJA also internalized. In normal circumstances, and it continues to operate this way within the UJA broader family, we of course have an advocacy organization called CIJA, and we have a campus organization called Hillel, which I will speak more about. But from UJA's perspective, I've commented on this role to try to identify some of the various gaps that we're talking about this evening, and see how it is that we can work together to be able to plug some of those gaps. And so the experience of students on campus is a better experience. Our lessons in May certainly were that broad movements, sort of at the masses level, where Jamie alluded to. She gave one example, but there are a number of other examples in terms of coordinating at the masses and building allyship. And so some of the lessons that Jamie raised, I won't repeat, but will in fact second. So between the work that UJA is doing to try to identify strategically whether the gaps exist, the terrific work that Neuberger Holocaust Center is doing on that piece, for which we've partnered with members of on this panel, in addition to CIJA, let me also discuss some of the work that we're doing on campus vis-a-vis Hillel, and some of the recommendations that we would have as a group. And I'll end with those. Jamie had 3 points, so I'll end with 3 points and recommendations as well that I also look forward to discussing in the Q&A. But one of them is to also find a way for students to run, to be represented in terms of student government. Chaim talked a little bit about identifying people. So it's not just advocacy from external organizations and internal organizations, it's being in the arena itself and being able to recruit and train and do that work so that we have students on the inside fighting. Of course, with the support of all the organizations and others who are not on this panel, but having students there as well. The corollary of that is that when there are rules that are made or decisions that are made, it's very important that the university enforce those. And it shouldn't take years and years to fight to enforce your own rules. And so if we do have situations where we have students in government, in the various organizations, or whether we don't, the reality is that the university needs to effectively play the proper role in ensuring that organizations aren't going offside. And when they are, to call that out. And it shouldn't take litigation to get there. I would say a third issue really is around, there's a number of different organizations. There's the DARA, we heard a little bit about tonight. You have the members on this esteemed panel, but you also have other organizations, both in the broader community and on campus. Some are large, some are small, some are niche, and some sort of very general. It's very important that all these organizations are able to continue to have a degree of dialogue, to understand where we can all work together so that we can apply more pounds per square inch of pressure on the actual problems. Dividing us as a community is a strategy that our opponents play well, but we can overcome that to a certain degree by our unity, not necessarily always in strategy, but our unity in terms of being able to provide support for the students. Because they're not, after all, really students, are they? I mean, there are sons, there are daughters, there are neighbors, It's not some third-party student body. They're our community. There's no difference. They just happen to be on campus right now. And I will end by saying that one of the elements that Hillel is able to do by being on campus is not only to push back on anti-Semitism, but also to provide identity and belonging for Jews that are on campus. And I've been very pleased to have been told that over the course of today and tomorrow, there's a conference going on in New York where Hillel International has organized a number of different university campuses to come to discuss under the guise of sort of countering anti-Semitism. And I know that the Hillel guys have worked with both U of T and York, who have sent representatives, senior representatives down to New York for this two-day conference. And so I'll just end how I began, which is to thank you all for having me, for listening, and for taking some of these contributions that we have, together with the ones that we've heard from Dara and from Jamie, the ones we're about to hear from Michael as well, and come up with a way that when the students return to campus in September, we're starting to receive good news from campus, and or we're pushing back on some of the bad news. So once again, thank you very much, and Chag Sameach to everyone.
Thank you, Steve. Let's turn now finally to Michael.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Rabbi Grover. And I'm going to start off repeating what everybody said, because it bears the repeating. To thank you to Beth Tikvah Synagogue, all the distinguished panelists. I can only echo Stephen in terms of actually what a pleasure it is to work with all of the organizations that are participating today. And I can say for me personally, how proud I am to participate in such a unified Jewish community that I think is reflective in all of you that are viewing here tonight. More than anything else that I've taken away just so far is we are unified, we are a proud, strong Jewish community, and we're going to continue to do so. And that really is always the best way to push back against anti-Semitism. I'm going to focus my brief remarks strictly on the University of Toronto. We just published at B'nai B'rith a report, One Step Forward, Three Steps Back is its name. We published it on Friday, and it's a rebuttal of the Anti-Semitism Working Group's report, which it recently came out with. Unfortunately, one of the great strongholds of anti-Semitism on campus in Canada is the University of Toronto. Israel Apartheid Week actually started at U of T, leapt outwards and across the world. And in fact, in 2021, the president of the University of Toronto Faculty Association claimed that she was the victim of a horrible backlash by an entitled, powerful Zionist minority that felt that any criticism of the Cromwell report, which is another U of T story, or anyone else could be met with accusations of anti-Semitism. Ultimately, when U of T's Graduate Students Union opposed a student-led drive to sell kosher food on campus, and the University of Toronto summarily refused to intercede, numerous faculty members from the U of T contacted our organization and worked together with us in order to petition the president of U of T, Merrick Gertler, and demand that he attempt to confront the rampant anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto. Initially, U of T refused to respond to us. However, after the Canadian Jewish News published an article that exposed Gertler's non-response and his previous public commitment to vigorously confront anti-Semitism at U of T did thankfully agree to meet. And in June of 2020, we were happily able to present U of T with our landmark report, Confronting Anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto, A Path Forward. And our report at that time concluded that although the University of Toronto already certainly possesses all of the policies and structures that are necessary to effectively combat anti-Semitism, U of T has actually refused to abide by its own respective regulations and instead has permitted anti-Semitism to re-entrench itself through the U of T and its various campuses. Initially, the U of T indicated that it would quickly respond to our report and endeavor to immediately engage in a constructive dialogue with the Jewish community, and this was also with the Jewish professors who were present at that meeting. Instead, U of T ignored our report, as well as all of our recommendations for institutional change at the U of T, and eventually elected to launch its own partisan, in my opinion, anti-Semitism working group in December of 2020. And I want to pause here for a second and quickly talk to you all about something that is terrible that U of T tried to do with their anti-Semitism working group in its final report. Through various means, U of T had the temerity in their working group to consult with anti-Zionist Jews who are in no way reflective of the mainstream Jewish community in Canada or our religious institutions. No doubt a feeble attempt at balance, but this was reflected with a weak and unbalanced final report. Anyways, in December of 2021, the AWG issues its final report. And as I'm sure you can guess, despite the fact that they required more than a year to construct the final report ultimately turned out to be completely and utterly inadequate. Firstly, the report refuses to at all address or acknowledge even one of the grievous anti-Semitic incidents that have transpired at the U of T since 2015. In fact, their report actually explicitly states that it is not a response to any specific incident, nor is it the form of an inquiry or report on a particular incident or incidents. Instead, its focus is on providing the university community with proposals about ways in which the university can provide a more inclusive space for Jewish members of its community. Secondly, and this is one of U of T's perennial problems, U of T already has all of the necessary infrastructure in place to effectively address any anti-Semitic incidents that arise on its various campuses. Unfortunately, the Jewish community has been systematically ignored and excluded from the overwhelming majority of this infrastructure. For example, through the report, the AWG itself is forced to concede that in order to at all effectively combat or confront anti-Semitism across its various campuses, U of T must unfortunately begin to ensure that university equity staff are adequately equipped to address anti-Semitism in the same ways that they address other forms of hatred and racism, and that more general equity policies are applied consistently in cases of reported anti-Semitic incidents. And I just want to pause here for a second and ask, why isn't this already the case? We know that Jews are an exceptional people, but why are Jews also treated as the exception to the rule? Is there a rule, a Jewish exception at the University of Toronto that allows U of T to circumvent and violate its own rules? Because in my opinion, it would be otherwise unimaginable for U of T to similarly and so overtly exclude other demographics, such as any other community, a victimized community, from the framework that they use to address hate or equity related issues. U of T has entrenched their Jewish exception on campus with this report. In addition, the report doesn't actually at all attempt to confront or eliminate anti-Semitism at the University of Toronto. Instead, the final report constantly endeavors to reaffirm that U of T's commitment to promote free speech and academic freedom supersedes its responsibility to protect its Jewish students and faculty members from anti-Semitism, danger, violence, and hate. For instance, it reiterates that anti-Semitic representations sometimes figure in criticism of Israel, and unabashedly proclaims that within the unique university context, the most crucial of all human rights are the rights of freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of research. More importantly, through the final report, academic freedom is mentioned 23 times. In contrast, justice is mentioned once. Safety is never mentioned. Apologize is never mentioned. Responsibility 4 times, 3 of which occur in the same paragraph. Duty is only mentioned once, and curiously, protect is mentioned 9 times, and yet it is only ever evoked in the context of either free speech or academic freedom. Moreover, despite the fact that academic freedom is mentioned 23 times through the report, in its meager 24 pages, academic freedom is not mentioned or invoked at all by the University of Toronto's Anti-Black Racism Task Force within its final report on anti-Black racism at the U of T. In addition, U of T's report on anti-Black racism never mentions free speech or free expression. In fact, freedom itself is only mentioned once, and even then, only in the context of MLK and his Black freedom movement, which begs the question, does the U of T really believe that free speech and academic freedom are really only at risk when anti-Semitism is at play or anti-Semitic incidents are being addressed? Or is this just another instance of U of T's Jewish exception hard at work? Their final report rejected IRA, not just at U of T, but within academia, claiming that IRA inherently contradicts the context of any university and is necessarily detrimental to academic freedom as well as free speech, despite the fact that almost every democratic nation, including Israel, has adopted it, as Dr. Summers has already mentioned, including leading universities such as Oxford, LSE, Cambridge, Stanford, etc. Even worse, the AWG used these non-reflective and extreme minority views of anti-Zionist Jews to bash and cudgel the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which in itself can be a form of anti-Semitism. And in fact, the final report emphatically refuses to at all define anti-Semitism. And as a result, the report can easily be weaponized in order to attack the Jewish community and its allies alike. And we already witnessed this in February when the UTSU's equity officer claimed that their final report had in fact concluded that anti-Zionism is never anti-Semitic, and that she had discovered that the final report with various members of the AWG who had had discussed it with members of the AWG who had themselves explicitly confirmed and reiterated her beliefs. In addition to all of this,
Michael, sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask
Okay.
you to summarize your
I'll-
remarks
I'll
so we
s-
have
I'll
enough time
summarize
for
it.
discussion.
absolutely. So in a nutshell, if you couldn't tell already, B'nai B'rith is quite dissatisfied with this report. It did as well reject the historic plight of Jewish people and repudiates the notion of anti-Semitism as unique in any way. I look forward to the questions and the conversations. I know that there's a lot to unpack there, but for any of you that want to read the report, it is available on the B'nai B'rith website, and look forward to, along with the rest of the panelists, answering some questions from you, Rabbi Grover.
Thanks, Michael. So let me first turn to the students and to Dr. Summers with this question. Tonight, you have the opportunity to speak to, we have about 250 screens on this call, representing many more people who are watching, and we're broadcasting on YouTube, and this will be recorded. You have an opportunity tonight to speak to people who really care about this issue. And from the comments that I'm receiving, people who are really curious about what they can do to help and make a difference. Use your platform tonight to speak directly to the audience, and try and explain what you think, what you need from us in order to feel like the community is taking this issue seriously, and that we can reverse course on some of these unfortunate decisions from the university. Let's start with you, Chaim. We'll just go in the same order as earlier.
Yeah, sure. I think I really, again, appreciate the opportunity. It was a pleasure to hear all the panelists speak, and I appreciate the attendance today and people taking their time out on a Monday evening. I think it kind of boils down, I won't repeat my 3 points at the end of the speech, but just given the anti-Semitism working group and that it was mentioned, we're at a stage right now where at the U of T campus, we can't even define our own persecution, right? Like, so anti-Semitism isn't defined at U of T. So if you go, how do you say to someone, I'm being attacked or I'm being hurt, when they can't even look at the definition to say, well, by this, I guess maybe, right? So we have very little tools at our disposal right now. And so I always think the first thing is education. I think education of our young Jewish students, I think of our allies, as was mentioned by a few panelists, to try and make sure we educate non-Jews as well. Because we need to understand the situation. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of complications, and we need to be able to defend ourselves. And that kind of brings me to the major point, which is, I think it's a mixture of two things. I think, as I said, Jewish students don't go to university to this isn't what I went to get a degree for. I didn't go to a degree at U of T because I wanted to fight for Jewish pride on campus. I'm very proud to be Jewish, but this is not what I intended to do as a side job. And I don't think any student, I mean, Yardena can speak to it as well, this is not what I think she signed up for either. And I've worked with a number of great Jewish leaders and non-Jewish leaders, as I've said, but we've gotten to a point where it's really hard to engage our youth. It's really hard to find people willing to stand up. And whether or not that's because we are at a stage where, I only go to university, or I have an exam tomorrow, or I'm busy, or I'm trying to get into a graduate degree, or I'm trying to get into a professional degree. And, if I stand up here, maybe it'll look bad on my reputation, right? There's so many reasons to not stand up. And some of it's fear, and some of it's busyness, and some of it's, there's tons of reasons. And I completely appreciate why some people aren't able to do so. But we need to be able to provide that community support, that community education to really engage our youth, because this is really a turning point on our academic campuses and our future. And I think we need to find a way as a community to to really encourage people that this is a priority. And I know, as you may not go to university for this, there is a future for you, even if you stand up for the Jewish people. And I want to end on like a really nice note, which is, I don't do this alone. Yardena doesn't do this alone. We have had the opportunity to work with great organizations and great people, but we need to continue to foster that and educate our young Jewish community. Thank you.
Chaim, just before I go to Yardena, the first point that you made about clarity on the definition of anti-Semitism, which I'm assuming was a reference to the university adopting the IHRA definition. So Michael was very clear in his remarks that that is the position of B'nai B'rith, that the school needs to adopt the IHRA definition, and he won't stop pressuring the university until he sees that happen. So can I ask, just before we go to Yardena, Jamie and Stephen, if you could answer that question, what is your position on the university adopting the IHRA definition? Has it been articulated? And is that a strategy that you think needs to be pursued as a priority by the Jewish community?
Well, speaking
Jamie.
for Wiesenthal, we absolutely 100% believe that the adoption of IRA is critical for U of T, and we have advanced that proposal at every possible opportunity and every meeting with administrators. This is absolutely critical. And just to spell out for people that maybe have heard of IRA or sort of believe it's important, but just to really explain why it is so critical, is because, if I could only tell you the number of students who have come to me having experienced an incident of anti-Semitism, and I support them in making a complaint. And the answer that I get back from the administration is, we cannot adjudicate on this complaint because we don't have a definition of anti-Semitism. Now,
wow.
I mean, so this is our strategy. This is a key to our strategy to start having our complaints.
Stephen, are you on the same page with this?
Yes.
So Yardena, let me turn to you now. Same question that I asked Chaim. You have a big audience. They want to hear from you. What do you think is missing from the conversation? What can we do to try and help on the ground?
Yeah, for sure. First, I just want to say that I definitely echo Chaim's sentiments, and that we are students that are going to U of T to learn, to get a degree. We are not going to fight for our own identity. Chaim, me, many other students are willing to, and we are proud to be Jewish, but we are students above anything else. There are a lot of people on this call, and so I just want to reiterate that we are very thankful for your support. As a representative of the Jewish students on campus, hearing that the broader Jewish community is there to support us is very comforting. However, we cannot fight fire with fire. The solution is not necessarily to start a Palestinian Apartheid Week or boycott radical professors when, as Mr. Mostyn said, U of T has policies against these situations. What we can do is ask the administration to uphold the policies against discrimination equally to all students so that we can be students, to work as hard for Jewish students as they do for minority groups on campus, such as Black students, to create a welcoming learning environment for greater academic achievement. The support we need from the community, from you listening right now, is sending emails to the school, to the administration, to the student unions, telling them that it's not okay to hire radical BDS supporters that publicly have called for the death of Israel. And that discrimination happens quite a lot on campus. As Chaim has said, we need support by attending and publicizing our events, such as one that Jewish Student Life ran, where we had a panel on the intersection between Israel and Judaism. Support us by standing up to the school and the student unions before the vote is called, because as a minority group, our votes do not measure up. 240 Jewish and not Jewish students voted against the anti-Semitic UTSU motion, while 250 voted for it. This margin means that you sharing our voices can make a change. So continue to support us and listen to the actionable items that we've suggested. Thank you.
Thanks, Yardena. Frank, to the audience tonight, same question. What
Well, I
you're a
hope
member of the faculty. What support are you looking for from the wider community and from the three organizations that are represented here tonight to make sure that an institution that you've served very proudly can remain true to it and can remain an institution that divides with integrity and that includes the voices of Jewish students?
I think it would be helpful if everybody who is on this Zoom call tonight, you would take the effort to send an email summarizing your reactions, your sentiments to the provost of the University of Toronto with a copy to the president of the university. Or if you wish, the president of the university and copy to the provost. Also, copy to the dean of the faculty of medicine might be useful. Simply stating what your reaction is, what you feel. I think it's important for administrators to hear what the wider community is thinking and feeling. I also would like to see the organizations represented here to reach out to the general Jewish student body in all the campuses and find a way to communicate with them that you are supportive of what they're going through, and they should not feel alone, and that you feel that you want to back up their freedom to walk across campus freely, whether it's wearing a kippah or wearing any kind of symbol of your Judaism. It is, I hope, clear that what we are finding, I can personally testify to this, that when I try to show some of our senior leadership in diversity and inclusion what some of our students are experiencing, they are surprised. So we need to do education, and we can't assume that they know what is actually happening to the students on the ground on a day-to-day basis, that they're hurting daily as we speak. So all the organizations, I think, need to combine their efforts, and maybe there needs to be a closer ongoing communication among all our groups to achieve some of these activities that we talked about and that I mentioned that Dara supports. We need to monitor the university's promise undertaking in the anti-Semitism group or working group report, which I commend B'nai B'rith for its amazing analysis of that report, and Mr. Mostyn's excellent exposition of what actually it lacks. It now provides an umbrella, a safety umbrella for those who actually have been doing some of the demonizing behavior and delegitimizing behavior. So this is a huge oversight, and it is important that a campaign be firmly backed up, that there has to be a diagnosis of what anti-Semitism is. You cannot treat a problem. I think, Chaim, you mentioned this at the outset, and it's so true in medicine. We know you can't treat an illness unless you have a diagnosis. And right now, anti-Semitism is not diagnosable. So it is so important that everybody on this call who's motivated, raise that issue when you write your little note to the university administration. And it is important that you perhaps also share your comments with the media, because this is an issue that affects the whole larger community. We need to reinforce our common efforts and stay united.
Stephen, can I turn to you now with a bit? Thank you, Frank. Stephen, with a question that I think has been facing me as I prepared to moderate this event tonight. I'm curious to know how UJA is handling this. I don't know if you guys are seeing the comments of the chat, but there's a lot of people who are concerned. There's a lot of people who feel there's too much talk. We have to take action. It's time to target. It's time to withhold donations. And yet at the same time, I've been hearing from voices from those who are on this call and those who are not on this call, saying, look, we have to be careful. The U of T has some very tight connections with some programs in Israel. We don't want to demonize the organization and begin a campaign that is too aggressive, or all of those partnerships and all of the work that we've done to build those partnerships over the years, they're under threat. So, Stephen, how are you at UJA navigating that tension between those who are saying it's too much talk and not enough action, and those who say we have to be very careful? It's a big university with tentacles all over the place, and we can't declare them the enemy, or the repercussions might be even worse than what we're currently experiencing.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rabbi. One of the things that we have is effectively Hillel, Ontario, which has a significant presence on U of T campus, doing whether it's Jewish identity or advocacy or pushing back on anti-Semitism. So we have an on-campus organization that every day lives the university life. So it's building relationships with the administration. It's doing a number of those things. When things go well, they stay out of the headlines. When things go badly, they don't, in a very bad way. Now, Hillel doesn't operate in isolation. You have the groups that are represented on the panel. There's groups that I know that are represented in the broader audience. And there's also groups in the wider community. And it's important we make sure that we work all the various angles that are important, because as you say, you don't want to lose ground, but you also want to say where we are is totally unacceptable. I think as a second element of this is there's work obviously that needs to happen online and offline. So in the offline world, there is a degree to which allyship, because I think the mathematics that Yordana took us through are exactly right. By the way, that's a microcosm of the larger community off campus, where in terms of mathematics of Jews in general society is also a minority. And so we all need to do a better job in terms of allyship, and what that means specifically is reaching out to other communities, less in a transactional matter. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. But how can we think of joint interests? How can we think of joint projects, joint ideas? Because we're not the only ones that are targeted. So how can we think about that from a policy perspective, a community building perspective, a legislative perspective? So there's a fair bit of work that we need to do offline, including also building stronger relationships at all levels. I think some of the comments on this on the chat referred to donors. Yes, donors have a particular relationship with university administrations. So do broader communities. So do professors. So do students. So do parents. And so it's important that we really push on those relationships. But the offline world, as we all know, is just one world now. The online world has become a significant part of that. And I was listening to Jamie's experience about all the calls that she was taking in the course of May. I know our organization, I think Michael's, was also taking a ton of calls, and some of that, I would hazard to guess, were not necessarily offline. Some of those attacks were online. The statistics in terms of people who are effectively attacked either directly or their friends on an online basis are over the top. So I think on social media as well, we need to do two things. One is really within our own Jewish community, is strengthen the community so they feel a sense of strong Jewish pride. They have a sense that their community is behind them. They have the proper resources. They have the information at the fingertips so that they themselves can become their own advocates. But to the non-Jewish world, we need to take. Listen, I've been saying now for months that the Jews are a great brand. We've been around for thousands of years, but our packaging may need to change, and that's certainly in terms of what I mean by our messaging. And so, if somebody who doesn't otherwise think of the Middle East can watch a 15-second video and all of a sudden form an impression or form a strong view about the Middle East, that talks to us. We need to fight in that arena as well. And so there's, Rabbi, a much longer answer about the dichotomies of focusing on elites versus the masses, the Jewish audience, the non-Jewish audience, the online world, the offline world. But to your question, we're looking at all of those various quadrants and saying, where are the interventions that are required? How do we get smart about all those? And how do we change the game within those? And I don't, by the way, just mean ourselves. It's working in partnership with the people on this call and others about saying, how do we push back in all of these arenas to create more safe space for Jewish students on campus? I would conclude by saying, that it is a microcosm of the broader world. Dr. Summers was talking about doing a proper diagnosis. Well, this is a global epidemic. This isn't just a U of T thing nor a Canadian thing, but it shouldn't be the case that a Jewish parent has to worry about sending their kids to campus because of the backlash they're going to get. Parents shouldn't have to worry about thinking in terms of synagogues. Where are you going to go? And if you're demonstrably wearing Jewish symbols like kippahs, we have an issue in this country and many countries right now about pushing back on attacks against Jews. And so part of it is over the larger microcosm, and part of it is some of the interventions I discussed within campus.
Thanks, Steve. Michael, I really have the same question for you, because we are seeing, Jewish students that we're very proud of, a faculty member at the university who felt shocked by what happened with the incident with Erwin Kotler last week, and we're all just outraged by what happened there. And yet, the answers seem to be, or at least the way Stephen is the way Stephen articulated, the answers are really long term. There's no instant action that I think Stephen is pointing to that's going to change the situation, but rather, Stephen, correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, but forging connections between all the various different arms of the community and all the different various arms of the university to make a difference in the long term.
I would just clarify and say, it's both. And I think Michael in particular has done a pretty good job of in the moment what can be done. That doesn't mean he's sacrificing the longer term, but it's a combination of.
It's a combination of both. So Michael, that's where I want to get your comments. We'll leave off with you, Michael. Is it the time first for urgent action? And again, this question is being motivated by what I'm seeing in the chats, right? Is it the time for urgent action, or is it the time for long-term strategy, or both?
Thank you very much for the question. I do think very much that it is a time for both. You expressed, Rabbi Grover, just, before, there's this dichotomy, of do we demand accountability or do we give in? Should we be worried about Israeli institutions losing their opportunities with the University of Toronto if Jews were simply to ask for equality? Nowadays, we speak within EDI about equity. And I think it's very important that we go back to the term equality as well. We are all equal under the law. And if we are to be punished within any system for demanding equality, then that system itself is unjust. So we shouldn't be afraid to stand up for equality. And these can all be done at the same time. There are some wonderful initiatives, going forward that Stephen was talking about. We always have to be focusing on education, but we also always have to be standing up to every incident of anti-Semitism and not turning the other cheek, but to demand a full equality. The university itself understands. Chaim has had an ordeal that's gone on for years and years. And it's not just U of T, but academic institutions, generally speaking, can deal with problems that they don't want to deal with by using maybe a Canadian analogy, ragging the puck. You rag the puck long enough, the student's going to graduate and they're going to go away. They understand that they don't have to deal with anything. These are ancient institutions sometimes, and they can keep going forward by ignoring problems. And the problems will, in fact, go away. Our community cannot allow this to happen. We have to focus. The U of T responded by creating this anti-Semitism working group due to community pressure that started with the students. It started with the professors. It started with the staff, and it started with community institutions beginning to support these various groups on campus in their rights for equality. And I believe the pathway forward right now, because we have expressed, again, community unity. I was hearing this from all of the panelists. All of us have been. The U of T needs to adopt IRA. The U of T got it wrong. The U of T got it wrong by creating this false dynamic between academic freedom and between naming anti-Semitism and stating clearly and coherently that we will deal with it. We will make sure that every single identifiable group on campus is equal and is treated equally, and not for safe spaces, but for the entire university and institution. We will stand up equally for everybody's rights. So what can we do? We can let the university know they got it wrong. Everyone at home can write in, as has already been mentioned, to the U of T. All of the institutions, all of the Jewish communal institutions, and by the way, you can only fit so many people into a room, but all of the synagogues can join together with some of the major Jewish organizations. And we can go in to President Merkler and say, you got it wrong in this report. You need to adopt IRA. That is what the Jewish community of Toronto and Canada demands. And we can also pressure government, because we have adopted IRA in Canada. We have adopted IRA in Ontario. We need to implement this institutions, because they clearly do not understand anti-Semitism when they see it. And working together, I think that we can put significant pressure on the university when we act as one unified Jewish community.
I really appreciate that, Michael, because I think a lot of people are looking for what can we do? And maybe we ended tonight's conversation with a goal. Maybe it seems to me that we have some targeted action that the community can truly unite behind. The IRA, we may have different strategies to get there, but the community should be vocal and united in really pushing the university to adopt that definition, because we don't stand a hope of combating anti-Semitism if we don't know what anti-Semitism is.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, Rabbi, from a B'nai B'rith perspective, I would be more than pleased to join with all of these other wonderful Jewish organizations that are here as panelists tonight, with the synagogue, with other synagogues in the city, with other major Jewish institutions, to push that point towards Dr. Merrick Gertler. And maybe that's something that we can all do together.
Sorry, can I just also add on very quickly?
Of course.
Because of something I noticed in the chat, the government is also a great way to voice your concerns. So write to your representatives. I've had discussions with the Minister of Education, and continue, like, more pressure will maybe encourage action to allow for better education on the Holocaust, on anti-Semitism, in elementary schools, in high schools, so that by the time students are getting to university and colleges, they don't have to face this same sort of anti-Semitism that Chaim, I, and many other students have.
Well, we should remember that in just a few days, the story of Pesach includes the story of anti-Semitism, which may not begin in our story at a university, but begins in Egypt, where the Haggadah tells us that Pharaoh put libels on the Jews. Vayareu otanu hamitzrim. The Egyptians made us appear as if we were bad. It all begins with telling the truth. So if we can put forward, I think, as a community, demand that we define truthfully what anti-Semitism is, so that we can combat it when we see it, perhaps we can advance this conversation, bring some sort of Yetziat Mitzrayim out of the straits that we find ourselves on universities today.
Amen.
So I want to thank you, Steve. I want to thank all of our panelists for participating in this important discussion. I really appreciate everybody's contributions. And I have to echo what Stephen said earlier in the panel, that our community, which often gets attacked for not being united, and everyone's got their own camp that they're responsible for, how wonderful it is to have different voices from different organizations, really with different strategies, but all on the same page with the work that has to be done. So thank you all for your dedication to this issue. To the students, I think you have impressed all of us with your commitment. You're absolutely right that there's not enough students on campus who are vocal when they see, or even when they experience anti-Semitism themselves, because they're there to learn and often just want to be left alone. It takes students with moral courage nowadays to speak up when they see injustice. Chaim and Yardena, thank you for being wonderful examples of what that looks like. Come visit us at Beth Tikvah once in a while. We'd love to welcome you. And Dr. Summers, your wisdom and experience, and I said to you before the call started, aren't you tired of fighting this issue? So your persistence is really inspiring, and we're so lucky to have somebody like you, not just because of your wisdom, but the way you speak with authenticity from your own story, representing the interests of the future from the perspective of the past among the faculty. Thank you very much. I wish I could go back to U of T. I'd like to take your class. Everyone, have a wonderful night. Chag kasher v'sameach.
Thank you.
Let's be together for good things.
Amen.
Amen. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Hag
Hag
Sameach.
Sameach, everyone.
Thank you all so much.